this is our data tool demo for Dataiku. For these sessions, we're going through a couple different data tools that are on the market that you might come across in the professional data realm or also in kind of spare time coding as well. For Dataiku, it is really a end-to-end like data platform where you can go through and have different parts of the data cycle that you would have with like a company's data through different phases such as data preparation, also visualization from the data itself, and then also for machine learning and kind of getting into different data models as you work with business data. And also some of the aspects of it involve data management for how a company can like interact with their data and kind of setting different permissions for who might be interacting with it. Other features include dashboard and app creation, and then there is a heavy emphasis on integration with other technology through Dataiku. So we'll go through that a little bit when we're actually looking at the tool itself, but it's not necessarily like a one-size-fits-all type situation. It seems like there are ways of connecting other like BI tools into it as well. And for this, just for some example industries, this is kind of a broad tool that can be used for different business use cases, but I just listed out like marketing, healthcare, retail, and public sector, some example industries that have data that could be used with this tool. And then in the presentation and on our GitHub as well, there are the hyperlinks that are in here for if anyone needs further information for where like this is gathered from or exploring links from there. We're going to be looking at Dataiku online, but the like platform part of it that we'll be looking at is Dataiku DSS, which from what I found stands for Data Science Studio. As mentioned, it's kind of an end-to-end environment for the entire data lifecycle, really emphasizing kind of like the visual aspect of being able to like work with data outside of just having like straight code for something. And for kind of the emphasis of like what goes on with it, there's the process of connecting with data, preparing it, working with modeling. Part of it is getting a little more into the specifics, like auto ML is what's considered part of the product itself. And then kind of what you can get out of the data that you're working with. So what kind of end products you might see from it. If it is like a dashboard or something that's like output to maybe like a CSV. And then like another part of it is just overall collaboration and how you can kind of see different updates to the data and the different workflows that are created in the tool itself. And the sample projects that we're going to be looking at are actually available from Dataiku itself. It's going to be customer, I think it's customer sales data that we'll be looking at, but they have a wide array of different sample projects that you can just kind of get up and running with that have different tutorials with them. And then just for like overall resources, I just put hyperlinks in here for the main Dataiku website, their learning hub, and a link for their trial. It is a 14-day free trial from what I've seen. Exit out of that, and then we'll go to, this is just overall for like their main platform for their website. So I'm already signed in on a different like browser instance, but this is just kind of the overall view of it, and a lot like in similar ways to a lot of the other tools that we've looked at before with this. It's kind of simple to navigate around and see like for learning different parts of it. But a lot of this data is drawing, as mentioned, from sample data that they have. After signing up for the trial, there are different instances that you can bring up for it. I'm going to bring up this view. logging into Dataiku itself, this is what comes up at first. And depending on how many different instances you might have, that you can navigate to different DSS environments. From here, I just have one main one running from there. So this is the data example that we're going to be looking at. It's customer lifetime value. And there's a little wiki that's down here. I'll scroll a little bit just for another view. But it's kind of trying to take different customer data and then interpret that and see what the like overall value that you can get out of that customer is from interacting with different product data. And for this, just being like the main overview of this environment, I just wanted to go over kind of like where to go from here. There are a lot of different like buttons that you can hit to go to the different features. We're gonna start off looking at the flow, which is kind of the visual representation of the interactions with the data sets that are here. But this like main navigation bar that's up here stays here the whole time. And then for like the overall environment, there is a timeline. So if you have different users that are in the same environment, you can kind of see what's going on from there. And then this breaks down a little more specifically depending on like what's going on. So we'll start at the flow for this one. So I think one like major aspect of Dataiku is for this part of it, it seems to be very kind of visual with what the setup is for how your data is displayed and kind of how things are interacting with one another. So the blue icons that are here are different data sets that are building into what this entire DSS environment is. So we have like new customer data and then different things that we'll be bringing in as well. Other example data sets that are in here, one of them is GDP for country to give a little more context to some of the customer data for like based on location. And then we can see different interactions as well. So I'll click on new customers just as an example to start. And then from this, we can hit explore data. And I think I can show it when we go back, but for actually bringing in data, Dataiku is pretty easily set up with a lot of the like major databases out there. So if like a company has data pretty much like in any like SQL platform or different like database, it can be brought in into Dataiku. So for this, it gives kind of a view of what the different columns are that are brought in for this data set specifically under new customers. And then if you click on the columns themselves, you can get some of, and maybe not with customer ID, but we can try this with the first item purchased from over here. One of the functions that you can do is analyze, which brings up kind of like summary statistics for some of the different columns that are there. So this can give, the first one is categorical, then there's numerical for it, which before like diving too far into the data, trying to see some aspects like they have like sectioned out some outliers. So that might be something like that could be helpful to see before getting into some of like the modeling phases, like with the data itself. But it's pretty like interactive with this showing, I don't know, kind of some of like the bins that are there. And then I think the clustering, I won't do that for this example, but just to show that like that is a feature, like that's there as well. And then another thing is the different like data types, like if that's something that needs to be changed before going like further in the process, like for example, that this customer data ID is in text, that can be like modified here as well. And then just going further, like with this one example, like data set that's part of like the full data model. There are also options, like if you want to make a chart, I'm not like going to go through the options of this because it's kind of the prelim data for it, but there are different like features that you can go through for your data. So I'm going to go back to this main flow, and then we're going to look at some of the options that are over here for what's going on. If we hit lab, that has some different actions that you can do from the data itself. And because this is the data before it's cleaned up, we won't go through these just yet, but there are different options to do like analysis at this point if you want to on like your preliminary data. So there are this one, for example. For the first item purchase, so for something like this, Dataiku reads in the data that's there, and you want to go through and make models based on that. It has an option to do some quick prototypes, so that is like a kind of customizable, like click and go part of that. But then there's also some different options to do models, like one of them's for business analysts, and then for kind of different customizable, like if you want to do algorithms or deep learning from like whatever's there, it's pretty easy to kind of click and then go from that point. And then another aspect of this is that depending on what the user level is for how much experience everybody has with coding, the whole platform pretty much goes from, you could either have the whole thing be like a variation of drag and drop, or you can get really in depth with how much code you want to integrate with the data that you're looking at itself. So there's the option down here for code notebooks. So for this, there's integration with different IDEs. So a lot of it is in Jupyter from like the examples that I've got pulled up, but if you're more comfortable in R, you can use RStudio to like write out specific code that you want to apply to the data before it gets used in some of the models that are here. I'm gonna go back to this just to show, so data sets in blue in different categories, but then there's also different steps in the process. So this little like broom will show for different like preparation of the data itself, so that can be set up for what's there. And then I think through this, if we do edit, I don't want to mess with it too much, but just to show kind of what's going on, that this has different steps from a script that's there. So we can see over here, you can parse dates in the data that you have. Like if you have kind of easy cleanup tasks that you know, like your data is coming in a certain way that can be easily applied throughout the whole, like I mentioned, for like the data lifecycle. So if this is being designed with the thought of this data is constantly being updated, or as like new records are coming in, that these same steps can apply to it. So there is the option to do new steps. So we can just do, I'm not gonna actually like run this, but just to show kind of examples here. So some of these you can kind of go through and see like what categories. So if we pick like strings, to see some base examples of what you can do. And it has descriptions like over in the other view right here for like splitting column names. Like if there's a delimiter that you have that's within the data itself outside of what is actually dividing the data to begin with, that can be something that you can split. And then doing some different for math. So if you want to do like the compute quantile, so this is pretty much a way to find some really core functions that you might have under these different like data types, or that you might come across to manipulate the data to pretty much clean it up. But if something isn't found like in the options that are here, like I mentioned, there is the option to just apply code itself to clean up the columns. And then if we go back, oh, also for that, I'll go back to where it has recipes. So flow is this overall view we're looking at right now. Data sets is just a different view of clicking on kind of these categories that we're looking at. And then recipes is what refers to kind of what's being applied to the different data to get it in the form that we want. So the ones that we were looking at were these kind of preparation steps. So that is kind of the combination of different steps that are being applied at that given part of the process. So then I think, try to see these other tabs I've got up here. So that one we already looked at. The other part of the process, outside of, okay, you have like your cleanup data, so then actually like working with it to try and get predictions and estimations from the data. I think that's like one of the big parts of Dataiku that gets leveraged. So for this example, it's working off of prepped data from the customers, and then for just overall model prediction, this is an example that's set up, but a big like emphasis is having, okay, you have your training and testing sets of data from like what you originally brought in. So for this example, it's training on the prepared data from this step using a random forest regression. And we can open that up to check it out. And for this, just to show kind of what's going on with it, as like the data models get brought up, you can pick like what factors you want to bring in to do the analysis, but it will suggest different aspects of the data that might be helpful to use in the data, or might be helpful to use in the model, but you can go in and kind of customize if the suggestions aren't really what you want. But that's kind of where Dataiku is bringing in that aspect of like working with your data to see what might be best used for a model. And then for this, go through, I'm going to click on a couple of these. I'm trying to figure out how to so I think this is, we go to design. Okay, so this is kind of what, before going through, there's a button up here to like train the data, but this shows what it's applying. So we're doing regression on the revenue part of the data that it's looking at. And then for all these different categories over here, it's kind of showing how the model is being customized before before you go through and train it. So there are different things that can be separated out here for like the training ratio, like what the random seed is, depending on like what you're working with, if you want it to be something consistent, depending on who's using it. And then so metrics, that's looking for the R² value. Debugging, I haven't really done much with that. But I think we go to hyperparameters. This has some of the different customizations. So one example for like the cross validation that's down here, depending on the number like of folds that are there. I know that's something with on the regression, like that, depending on what you're setting for these, like that could like affect the output in the model. So if you go through this whole process, you train it, like you don't get exactly maybe what you want from it, then you can go through and tweak like some of these aspects for what might get you a different, maybe improved result. And then I think, let's go back to this. And then if we hit results, so this is like the output from it. We can see for this, it looked at both ridge regression and then also random forest, but It gives scores for both of them for the AUC, the area under the curve, and whichever one has like the highest score from that, it decides to keep as like the model to work with for like the rest of the process. So that's kind of the scores that are down here. And then it also gives outputs we can see for some of the other aspects of it. Like it's got most important variables from what it found while it was running. And then regression, like a little bit different. So that's looking for the coefficients that are playing into the model. So for both of those, that gives us that part of the flow. But then that's pretty much just training the model. So then after that, actually testing the data. So that'll come in the form of, there's a feature to add scoring. And then if we open that up. So this has input and output. So this shows us, you can modify this to have what it's bringing in if you have a specific input test set that you want to use for that. You can do that here. And then this just has some other customizations that can go from there. But if we go back to the flow. And after using that scoring of the data, so that's going to give us pretty much the predictions that it's grabbing based on data that wasn't used in the training process. Then you can get a whole new data set that can be used for other parts of the process from like what the outputs were from it. So we can see the new like column that's added on the end of this that has the predictions that it's getting from the model itself. So then once that data is here, then it can get used for different parts of the process. One of them being from the different features up here, one of them being a dashboard. So this is an example of a dashboard that went with this sample of data just to show what the outputs were from it and kind of put that into different visualizations that can get used. I didn't do like a lot with it, but for this platform, I think we've seen it across a lot of the different data tools, actually going in to make different customizable graphs. Much like other products out there, there are different ways to choose what type of graph you have, customize different variables like the title, the different axes for this. And I think we go down here a little bit. Another part of like this little dashboard that was put together, it shows what we had just previewed in a different tab, but the scored data set, just like a subset of it that can get viewed for somebody that might not want to like be in the whole looking at the entire like data cycle for this. And then another thing that this puts together, so you can also get some visualizations based on the model itself. So this one is showing a scatter plot of the model and how well like the predicted values and the actual values, what the like error is between that, just kind of in a nice like visual representation. And then also kind of what we saw in the other view of the model as well, you can get graphs of, for this example, is variable importance from the model itself.
Hi. What up?
Hey, Jaren, do you have a question?
Sorry.
If you have a question, please feel free to unmute and ask.
Yeah, I have a question.
Oh, sure.
So you're talking about the model. Where is the model? Where I can see that model? Because you mentioned it multiple times.
Yeah, so for the regression model itself, if we go to this part, So it's the this part of the cycle for like the actual like regression, like predictive model that's there. Because it's already been run, I'm not like opening like the model itself, but from what we saw from that view that had the different customizations for like the inputs and outputs, that's kind of the view of what it is, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, and Ashley, it looks as though, and I may be wrong on this, but it looks as though you can effectively put in certain metrics that you want to hit for R squared, for heteroscedasticity, for autocorrelation, and the models will tell you by going through different random forests and different styles of model what the most effective model will be. So the model is run in the background, you point and click for the metrics that you're interested in seeing and the confidence rate that you want to have.
Yeah, and then the other thing too, a lot of these have like the backbone of like scikit-learn and all these other models that they're leveraging, like with the models that they're showing, they didn't like create brand new, like, I don't know, it wasn't making like everything from nothing for all these like models to get, you know, all the right parameters and things like that. They're basing it off of kind of pre-existing like libraries and packages for the different stats that are there.
Okay, got it.
So I think one other thing that I wanted to take a look at, just to show kind of the like integration with other parts of the cycle, if we oh, for this, not in this example, but if there are different sections to split up, go back to this main instance. I have another example that has two different zones that are there. So that is an option depending on how things want to be split up. So this one has examples of data preparation is in one area and model assessment is in another. So if you want to like split those two things up depending on what's getting worked with, that is a possibility from there.
So Ashley, is that kind of like a logical layout where you can just to create more of a cohesive model and a better understanding of the steps that are taken, you can break that out into different parts and pieces?
Yeah, I think that's like where they were going with like having that like separated like from the get-go, depending on like what part it was.
Mm-hmm.
So the model assessment that uses the data from the data preparation. That's how I can visualize, or there's something different?
Yeah, so for this one, it's kind of doing the same thing where it has all these kind of data set like inputs for what's coming in, getting cleaned, and then getting prepped for the model assessment itself. But then we can see, zoom in a little bit down here. So this example uses random forest as well as the model, like the predictive model that it's going to work with. So this would bring up kind of like a similar view to what we saw in that other example.
Yeah, so Biraja, it looks like the customer revenues table is being built in zone 1, and then the customer's revenue table is being used as a baseline piece in the actual model assessment.
Okay.
I think for this, if we... Okay, sorry, that's not what I wanted. I was gonna show for different inputs for uploading files. So I don't have this like set up to any databases that I'm bringing in from, but it does have like the option, like if you do have anything with Amazon S3, like that can be brought in from here. But for the different dataset types, this kind of gives an overview of from different like SQL options or from cloud storage where data might be coming in from that you can hook it up with for what's here. And then the other part as well, if you have data that you're already working with in Dataiku that are in other areas, you can import that into what you're looking at as well. And then another part of this, just to look at kind of for an example of the code that you can customize with it. There are different, for this, let me see. For the different IDEs that can get hooked up, this one is looking at Jupyter, looking at Python itself, but just as an example of kind of how Dataiku is working in this environment. It's set up as a package that it's bringing in, and then just like other instances working with Python in like a notebook setting like this, you can import different libraries. One part of this that was brought up was for different like coding environments. So for example, like if you just want to have certain packages that you're using in certain parts of the process, you can kind of separate and have specific coding environments depending on like what's going on, so you don't have all this like storage taken up by packages that might not necessarily need to be used in other parts of the process. But I think for that part of it, I feel like there's one more example that I wanted to show with like a data set that doesn't work very well. So I brought in a very small data set that has like different data. I'll open it up real quick. I want to say something like 159 rows. There's not a lot of data to this. It has a couple different aspects that I had as an example as something to use with linear regression to kind of predict the weight of a fish specimen based on all these different parameters, but I just wanted to see kind of how this would interact with a data set like this to see like what it would bring up with it. But for open this up, I think. So I'm gonna go through to try and get. Okay, so that one doesn't have it, but I think, sorry, I would have to poke around a little bit more with it, but when I tried to bring up like a model prediction for this, it pretty much didn't let me do it because the data set was so small that it was saying, hey, this model's not even gonna like be good for what you're trying to bring it in for. So I think it does have like some benefits to having those like interactive parts of it as well, saying like, hey, these parts of the data set might not be good, or if there's like data like baseline data issues that could prevent kind of getting a model output that would be reflective of what makes sense. It kind of wants that base number of data points to even feed into that to begin with. But does anyone have questions about like anything that they want to look at? Anything specifically in this? I can try and go through. I think we looked at most of these for like notebooks. That shows if you have anything interactive that's working with that. Does anyone have like any questions otherwise for the product itself?
So how do we export the data on the final output from here?
Yeah, so for that part of it, you can output, it has like a lot of different file formats if you have something specific like that you want to output it to. but also if, like, for a company, for example, there's like API integrations where you can have the data that's coming out, like, for example, from like these predictions, if you want that to update something somewhere in the form of like an app, there's like that option as well. And then I think for sharing, it kind of goes with that same thing for if you have like a whole data set that might get sent to somebody, or you can set it up to have like parameters of, hey, like if something hits a certain threshold for maybe the scores are really low for predicted spending or something like that, then somebody would get kind of like whatever the output of the data was. So I guess there's like a couple different ways data can get delivered from this if it's to a point of somebody just wanting to review it.
Can this get output into a database?
I believe so. Yeah, I think it has like that kind of integration the other way as well for where it's ending up.
Well, this is awesome. It's giving me big college statistics class scaries. But this was really great. One last question from me. Do you know if this integrates with GitHub?
Oh, I believe it does. Let me check in the documentation real quick, but I think that was something that I noticed while I was going through it. Okay, let's see. Yep, so it says for like what we were looking at, if considering that like the data science studio, like whatever specific one, it says that you can connect that with an external like Git repository. So I think kind of having that same, I guess, like accountability for like changes getting made or anything like that. Oh, and then I think I didn't bring it up exactly, but there was another part of it where depending on what part of the process, like you can go in and you can make comments and kind of have different like sidebar like discussions from different parts of the whole cycle if that's what's needed as well.
Awesome. That's really cool.
Do you have any idea about the pricing model for this?
I actually don't. Let me see.
I can look that up quick. So it looks like for 3 users, you can have it for free forever. And then there are different prices for for the additional teams. They don't seem to have them listed, but have free trials for each.
Does anyone have any other questions?
So are you partner with the Dataiku, or are you providing any opportunities if you learn the tool?
So we don't partner with any of the demos that we're giving. We're just doing this because these are really interesting tools that we feel are prevalent in the industry. If you would like a contact to some of these, we have actually reached out to some of the representatives at those organizations for these demos to get a better understanding of this. And then if you want advice or consulting, feel free to reach out. We put the socials in at the beginning. So feel free to reach out to us on any of those if you'd like additional information or help setting up your instance or anything like that.